David Turner believed this trip would be a turning point. For months, the idea of it had carried him through late nights at his desk. Lines of code blurring across the screen, a break from deadlines, a chance to remind his family what life was really about. Claire had insisted on the destination, a beachside resort in Florida, and their kids, Ethan and Lily, had been counting down the days as if it were Christmas morning waiting to arrive. As they loaded the car and set out, everything seemed to fall perfectly into place. The road stretched out like a promise. Sunlight streamed through the windshield. Lily hummed in the back seat, and Ethan cracked jokes that made Claire laugh louder than David had heard in months. For a moment, it felt like the old days, when laughter came easy and love didn't feel so heavy. At the resort, David snapped a family photo by the entrance. He sent it to his work group chat with the caption, "This is the kind of reset every programmer deserves." His smile in that picture was genuine. The salt in the air, the sound of waves crashing, the sight of his children racing toward the lobby. It all seemed like proof that the dream still lived. Claire looked radiant that afternoon, walking through the glass doors with the ocean breeze catching her hair. She turned to him and said with conviction, "This is exactly what we needed." And David wanted to believe her. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to breathe. The first day was filled with the kind of moments families build memories on. Ethan daring his sister to run into the cold surf. Lily screaming with delight as the waves lapped her legs. Claire ordering fruity drinks and smiling like a woman free of burdens. They played cards in the hotel room, walked the grounds at sunset, and ordered ice cream cones before bed. To anyone watching, they looked like the picture-perfect American family, but David noticed things. Small things at first. Too small, he told himself, to mean anything. Claire's phone was always face down on the table. Notifications silenced. She smiled quickly at her screen when she thought no one was looking, tucking it away as if it were fragile, private. And then there was the energy. Odd. Misplaced. After long shifts at the hospital, she was usually drained, dragging her feet through the house, but here, she seemed charged, restless, almost as if something else were fueling her joy. He brushed it aside at first. He told himself he was being paranoid, the kind of husband who reads into shadows. After all, wasn't this what he wanted? A wife who laughed again, kids who shouted and played, days where stress melted away in the sun. This was supposed to be their escape. At dinner the second night, Claire lifted her glass of wine and clinked it against his, saying, "To us. To starting fresh." The kids giggled, unaware of the weight behind those words. David raised his glass and smiled, but a knot twisted in his stomach. Her eyes didn't quite meet his. She was radiant. Yes, but radiant in a way that didn't feel like it belonged to him anymore. Later that evening, while the children drifted to sleep, David sat on the balcony overlooking the ocean. The moonlight glittered across the water, the hum of waves steady and soothing. Inside, Claire was on her phone again, screen glowing against her face. She laughed softly at something she read, then quickly set it aside when she realized he was watching. He told himself it was nothing. She deserved her space. Everyone needed their private moments. But the seeds of doubt had already been planted, deep enough to take root. David leaned back in his chair, staring at the stars. He thought of all the years they had built together. The mortgage, the birthdays, the Christmas mornings, the quiet nights when she fell asleep on his shoulder. He thought of the promises they'd made, of the life they'd promised their children. He wanted to trust that nothing had changed. He wanted to believe the woman inside that room was still his partner, his Claire, but something inside him whispered otherwise. It wasn't loud yet. It was just a faint suspicion, like a distant storm on the horizon. But David knew storms. He had weathered many in his life, and something in his gut told him this one was different. This one was coming for him. For now, he held on to the illusion, gripping it tightly, as though love could be forced back into place by sheer will. For now, he smiled for the kids, laughed when he needed to, played his role as husband and father. But the cracks had begun to show, and once cracks appear, they only spread. The second morning at the resort began like a dream. The kids splashed in the shallow end of the pool, their laughter echoing across the courtyard. David leaned back in his chair, finally beginning to feel the weight of his responsibilities ease. For the first time in months, he thought he might actually be relaxing. Then, it happened. Claire, carrying towels back from the poolside kiosk, bumped into a man in a crisp polo shirt. His smile was wide, his handshake firm, his voice friendly. Mark Ellis. He introduced himself. A medical equipment salesman. He said he knew Claire from a conference in Chicago years ago. Claire laughed with recognition, her eyes bright as she said, "It really is a small world." David watched the exchange from his chair. At first, he thought nothing of it. Vacations are full of coincidences. Passing strangers. Random meetings. But something about the way Claire's voice lifted when she spoke to Mark caught him off guard. She laughed too quickly. Too easily. The sound carried a softness he hadn't heard in years. Mark was charming. No doubt. Within minutes, he had Ethan and Lily's attention, giving them tips on the best arcade games inside the resort's recreation room. The kids liked him immediately, as children often do with adults who show them attention. David stood, smiled politely, and shook the man's hand. But in his chest, a strange unease was already forming. The rest of the day unfolded without incident. Claire spent more time at the pool, splashing with the kids, while David nursed a drink at the swim-up bar. Every so often, he caught glimpses of her, leaning back in a lounge chair, Mark sitting beside her, the two of them talking, laughing like old friends reunited. David told himself not to read into it. Claire deserved to have friends. She worked hard, carried heavy shifts at the hospital, and rarely had time for light-hearted conversation. Still, each laugh stabbed at him. Each smile that wasn't his chipped away at the picture-perfect illusion he'd been clinging to. That evening, Claire suggested they take the kids out for dinner at a restaurant just outside the resort. The night air was warm, the food good, the kids lively. Everything seemed normal, almost too normal. When they returned to the hotel, Claire excused herself early, saying she was tired. She kissed David lightly on the cheek and disappeared into their room. David lingered. He told her he might walk a little, just to clear his head. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was restlessness. Maybe it was instinct. He wandered through the resort grounds, the sound of the ocean faint in the background, palm fronds swaying in the night breeze. The air smelled of salt and hibiscus. And then he saw it, near one of the stone pillars by the parking area. Under the pale glow of a street lamp, two figures stood close. At first, it was just the outline of their bodies, shadow against shadow. Then the light shifted, and the truth became undeniable. It was Claire, her arms around Mark's neck, his hands resting on her waist. Their lips met in a kiss. Slow, deliberate, unashamed. She smiled into it, her face illuminated by a joy brighter than any he had seen directed at him in years. David froze. For a moment, he felt as if the ground had slipped out from under him. His chest tightened. His breath caught. A single thought blared through his mind. This is real. It's happening. She is his. Every instinct in him screamed to step forward, to demand answers, to tear the moment apart. But something else held him back. The kids, Ethan and Lily, asleep in the room upstairs. Innocent. Unaware. Did they deserve to see their family shatter in a single night? Did they deserve to wake up to shouting? To anger? To a father raging at a mother they adored? So David stepped back into the shadows. He clenched his fists until his nails dug into his palms. He swallowed his rage until it burned like acid in his throat. And he turned away. When he returned to the room, Claire was already in bed, lying on her side with the blanket pulled to her chin. She breathed evenly, calmly, as though she had only gone for a stroll, as though she hadn't just handed her heart to another man under the Florida sky. David lay beside her, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Every breath she took felt like an insult, every sigh like a dagger. His mind replayed the image again and again, her arms around Mark, her lips curving into that smile, a smile that hadn't been his in years. He wanted to shake her awake, demand to know how long it had been going on, how many lies had been told, how many nights had been stolen. He wanted to rip the illusion apart and see her face when the mask finally fell, but he stayed silent. For Ethan, for Lily, for the children who believed their parents were still a team, the hours dragged on. sleepless and heavy. In the dark, David lay beside the woman who had just betrayed him, pretending to sleep, pretending to be whole. But deep inside, something had shifted. The storm had arrived, and though he had not spoken a word, he knew there would be no turning back. The morning after the kiss, David could barely look at Claire. She moved through the room with casual grace, humming as she helped Lily braid her hair, offering Ethan a second helping of cereal, speaking as though nothing in the world were amiss. For her, it was another vacation morning. For him, it was a battlefield disguised in sunlight. He sat in silence, his coffee cooling in his hands. The image from the night before burned in his mind. Her smile, her lips pressed to Mark's, the way her body leaned into his as though it belonged nowhere else. David forced himself to keep breathing, to keep playing his part. He answered her questions with clipped words, nodded when the kids asked if they could head back to the pool. By midday, he felt like he was suffocating. Claire gathered towels and sunscreen, herding the kids out the door. David said he was tired, that he would stay in the room to rest. She didn't push him. She just smiled faintly, kissed him on the forehead, and left. The door clicked shut. Silence filled the room. David sat there for long minutes, staring at the closed door, before his eyes fell on her purse. It sat casually on the nightstand, her phone plugged into the charger. His heart pounded. For 13 years, he had never touched it, never needed to. Trust had been the foundation of their marriage. Or so he thought. But last night had destroyed that illusion. With steady hands, he picked it up. The home screen looked innocent. Apps in neat folders, calendar reminders, texts from friends and coworkers. But then he saw it, a folder labeled simply Docs. Generic. Unremarkable. Almost too unremarkable. When he tried to open it, the phone asked for a password. David hesitated. His chest tightened. Was he really going to cross this line? He thought of Claire's kiss under the street lamp, the way she came back to bed, as though nothing had happened. His hesitation evaporated. He typed their wedding anniversary. Denied. He tried her birthday. Denied again. Then he tried Ethan's birth date. The screen blinked and unlocked. The folder opened like a trapdoor to another world. Inside were screenshots, videos, audio files, archived conversations, all carefully organized. Claire had built a secret diary of her parallel life. The first messages David opened were with Mark. The words sliced into him like knives. You're my breath of freedom. With you, I feel alive again. There were emojis, hearts, kisses, winks, signs of intimacy he hadn't seen from her in years. In one message, she wrote about the boredom of marriage, mocking David's predictability. She laughed about how easy it was to keep him in the dark, how he never questioned anything. The worst came when he found a conversation about the vacation itself. Weeks earlier, she and Mark had planned it down to the smallest detail. The same hotel, the same dates. What looked like a coincidence had been a carefully rehearsed performance. Mark's reply chilled him. No one suspects well-rehearsed coincidences. David's hands trembled as he scrolled further. The betrayal wasn't new. This wasn't her first affair. In chat after chat, Claire referenced other trips, other meetings, names he didn't recognize. A pattern emerged, a double life stretching back years, hidden beneath the mask of a dutiful wife and mother. Then he found something even colder, notes she had written to herself, tucked away in a digital notepad, plans, options, a list that included check legal consequences of possible divorce, organize David's life insurance documents, and talk to Mark about custody if things come to light. It wasn't just infidelity, it was strategy. It was a woman mapping out her escape route, while still lying beside him every night. David set the phone down, his chest heaving. His mind raced through the years. Every late shift she claimed at the hospital, every unexplained weekend away, every moment she dismissed his questions as paranoia. Now, in the glow of the phone's screen, all of it came into focus. He had been living in a play, his role written by someone else. The faithful husband, the unsuspecting father, the fool who never saw the script. David pressed his palms to his eyes, fighting the sting of tears. He wasn't just betrayed. He was humiliated. His entire life, as he understood it, had been constructed around a lie. But even through the crushing weight of discovery, something inside him shifted. Rage gave way to clarity. Pain gave way to purpose. He would not scream. He would not confront her blindly. Not yet. He would gather every detail, every message, every note, because now David knew he wasn't just fighting for his marriage. He was fighting for the truth of his own life, and truth, once revealed, could never be buried again. The more David read, the deeper the abyss became. Each file seemed designed to cut him open, to peel away whatever fragments of trust were left. But he couldn't stop. The truth had already shown its face. And now it demanded to be seen in full. Scrolling through Claire's files, he found a folder labeled private. It was locked with a different password. His hands shook as he tried possibilities. The hospital name, their wedding date, each attempt denied. Then, almost without thinking, he entered Ethan's birth date. The folder opened. What spilled out was worse than anything he had imagined. There were digitized copies of old photos. Among them, one froze him where he sat, Claire in the arms of another man. The caption read, "It was always you." The man was her ex-fiancé, Brandon. The timestamp on the photo matched a weekend years ago when Claire had claimed to be at a nursing conference in Detroit. Shortly after Ethan's birth, David stared at the image until his vision blurred. Then, almost mechanically, he opened another photo and looked at Brandon's face. The shape of his jaw, the angle of his smile, the same slight tilt of the eyes. Then he thought of Ethan. His boy. His firstborn. The child he'd cradled in trembling arms. And in an instant, similarities he'd never noticed before became undeniable. Ethan's grin. His eyes. The very way he tilted his head. It was all Brandon's. David sat motionless. His stomach hollow. His chest heavy as stone. He wanted to scream. To tear the phone apart. But he forced himself to keep going. Another string of files appeared. This time labeled with initials. H. Man. It didn't take long to recognize the name Dr. Henry Morris. A colleague Claire had worked countless night shifts with. There were affectionate voice notes, photos, even fragments of messages. "Thank you for making me feel like a woman again. Lily looks just like you when she smiles." David pressed his hand against his forehead, the world tilting beneath him. He pictured Lily, the little girl who clung to him when she was afraid, who called him daddy with such certainty. Her eyes, her hair, her gestures. He had never thought twice about where she came from. But now, side by side in his mind, Lily bore the features of another man, not his. The truth came crashing down with the force of a hammer. Neither child he had raised, neither life he had built around fatherhood, was biologically his. For a long moment, David couldn't breathe. His life unraveled in silence. 13 years of birthdays, Christmas mornings, scraped knees, bedtime stories, all now reframed as a cruel joke. He was a father. Yes. But only in name. The foundation he had built his identity on was nothing more than sand. And yet, as the weight of betrayal pressed down, something inside him hardened. Tears did not come. Rage did not erupt. Instead, a cold, focused clarity took its place. David reached for his notebook. He began to write. Dates. Names. Conversations. He copied files. Organized screenshots. Created backups. Every detail became evidence. Each discovery cataloged with precision. He hid one copy on a flash drive. Another in encrypted cloud storage. Because this was no longer about Claire's lies. This was about survival. About reclaiming what little dignity remained. The shock was gone. The grief, buried under discipline. In its place stood resolve. Quiet. Unshakable resolve. David realized he had been cast in a story not of his making. A script where he played the fool while others filled the roles of lover, father, confidant. That script was finished now. He would write the next chapter himself, and in that chapter, Claire would no longer be the author. David closed the phone, placed it exactly as he had found it, and sat in silence. The ocean roared faintly outside the window. Children's laughter drifted from the pool below, and Claire's purse sat innocently on the nightstand, as though it weren't holding the ruins of a life. In that stillness, David made a vow. He would not confront her tonight. He would not expose his knowledge in a burst of rage. He would wait, gather, and prepare, because this was no longer a marriage. This was a war of truth against deception, and David Turner, the man everyone thought predictable, had just become dangerous. David woke the next morning with a plan already forming. He had spent the night staring at the ceiling, hearing Claire's steady breathing beside him, while his mind replayed every file, every message, every photo. The truth was too heavy to carry alone. It had to be acted upon that Monday, under the guise of a normal workday. David drove not to the office but to the law firm that had once helped him buy their home. He sat across from a seasoned attorney, opened his laptop, and slid a flash drive across the table. What followed was not the rambling of a broken man but the calm, methodical delivery of evidence, dates, passwords, screenshots, recorded notes, even the captions Claire had written beneath photos with other men. The lawyer listened quietly, his brow furrowing as each piece was laid out. When David finished, the man leaned back and said, "This is the most solid case of infidelity I've seen in years. If you're ready, we can dismantle this step by step." David nodded. He was ready. The following week, he moved into a small apartment near his office. It was plain, just a mattress, a table, and a chair. But it gave him air to breathe. When Claire came home one Friday evening and found divorce papers waiting on the kitchen counter, her face turned pale. She asked if it was a joke, begged him to talk, accused him of overreacting. But David didn't argue. He simply told her, "This is only the beginning." What followed was a storm of silence, messages, tears, late-night apologies whispered through the phone. David ignored them all. The time for words had ended. In court, the truth finally stood in the open. Paternity tests confirmed what David had already seen in those files. Neither Ethan nor Lily was biologically his. The courtroom grew still as the judge read the results. Claire bowed her head, her face drained of color. David did not gloat, did not shout. He sat still, his hands folded, his dignity intact. The ruling was clear. David was freed from any obligation of child support. The judge noted the years of deception, the carefully orchestrated lies, the deliberate concealment. Claire tried to argue for mercy, to appeal to emotion, but the weight of the evidence was crushing. Every file, every note, every hidden folder painted her betrayal in undeniable strokes. But David didn't stop there. His lawyer filed an additional suit for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about making the law recognize the years stolen from him, the false identity forced upon him, the emotional wreckage he had been left to clean up. Months later, the case was decided in his favor. David walked out of the courthouse with a financial settlement that ensured Claire could not profit from her deception. More importantly, he walked out with the truth validated. His pain had been seen, acknowledged, and written into the record of law. Claire, once so confident in her schemes, left that same courthouse ruined, without the settlement she had expected, without the assets she believed she would control, and with her reputation publicly stained. The life she had built on secrecy had collapsed in full daylight. David, though broken, carried himself with quiet strength. His marriage was ashes. The children he had raised were no longer his by blood. His home, his routine, his very sense of identity had been shattered. And yet, as he stepped onto the courthouse steps, sunlight fell across his face, and he lifted his head high, because justice had been served. For the first time in years, David Turner no longer felt like a man trapped in someone else's script. He was no longer the fool in Claire's carefully written play. He was the author of his own story again, and though the next chapter was uncertain, one thing was clear: he had survived the storm, and he had done it with dignity intact. The years that followed were quiet, stripped down to their bare bones. David Turner rebuilt not in grand gestures but in steady, deliberate steps. He poured himself into work, long hours spent refining systems, solving problems no one else wanted to touch. His evenings were simple: running through the park until his lungs burned, reading books that had gathered dust for years, learning how to live with silence. Loneliness didn't frighten him anymore. It was easier than betrayal, easier than pretending. The solitude became a kind of companion, a place where no one could lie to him, where no one could rewrite his life. For nearly 4 years, he kept his world small. Then one afternoon, while consulting on a school's technology program, he met Hannah Collins. She was a literature teacher, a widow raising her son alone. Their first conversations were practical, flipped exchanges about schedules and budget lines. But then a remark about Steinbeck turned into a shared laugh. A stray observation about resilience became the seed of something more. Hannah's life carried scars of her own. Her husband had been taken by illness, leaving her to raise 10-year-old Samuel with quiet strength. When she learned about David's past, she didn't recoil. She didn't pity him. She simply listened, then shared her own grief. It wasn't a dramatic confession. It was two people setting down their burdens side by side and finding they could stand taller together. Their bond did not ignite like wildfire. It grew like a stubborn vine between stones. Slow, steady, resilient. Coffee after school meetings, occasional walks with Samuel. Small, ordinary moments that carried no secrets. No masks. For David, it felt foreign at first. Honesty without fear. Connection without pretense. Over time, Samuel began to look for David on weekends. They played video games, watched old movies, sat on the porch and talked about baseball. For the first time since his world had collapsed, David felt what it meant to be chosen. Not because of blood, not because of obligation, but because a child wanted him there. Then one evening, Hannah appeared at his door holding a small white stick in her trembling hand. Her eyes searched his. She whispered, "I'm pregnant." For a moment, the world went still. Years earlier, those words would have filled him with panic, with suspicion, with dread. But now, something inside him broke open. He didn't question. He didn't doubt. He pulled her into his arms and wept. This time, it was real. Through the months that followed, David was present for everything. Every appointment, every flutter of movement, every name scribbled on paper before they finally chose one together. When their daughter was born, he was the first to hold her. Her cry echoed into the hollow places of his heart, filling spaces he thought would remain empty forever. As he looked down at her tiny face, her fingers curling around his, David felt a certainty that no lie could ever touch. She was his. Entirely. Unquestionably his. The sleepless nights, the endless diapers, the exhaustion that threatened to undo him, all of it became proof of a truth he had long been denied. Love that required no disguise. Family built not on illusion, but on trust. And in those quiet hours, rocking his daughter against his chest, David understood something at last. Betrayal hadn't ended his story. It had remade it. He had lost a life built on lies, but he had gained something greater: truth, dignity, and the family he thought he'd never deserve. Betrayal didn't just destroy David's marriage. It remade him. He walked away from a script written in deception, and he wrote his own ending instead. Justice gave him peace. Love gave him purpose. And in the end, he discovered that the truest home isn't the one you're handed. It's the one you build with your own 2 hands. Men, if you were David, would you have stayed silent? Or exposed every lie? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and pass it on to someone who needs to hear that justice and dignity are always worth fighting for.